Enlightenment is simply not perceiving through ego. It's not seeing life or anything. Self, others, your tennis shoes, your dog, your cat, your livelihood, anything. It's just not seeing the world, not seeing everything through the distortion called egoic state of consciousness. That is why it's been likened to the natural state. Natural meaning it's not an alternative lens, distorting lens, it's just perception without a lens. Without a distortion. Ultimately that's what enlightenment is. It's perception without distortion. Whether it's perceiving the nature of what you think is yourself, which there isn't one, whether it's whether it is perceiving a thought, whether it is perceiving a feeling, whether it is perceiving a situation, whether it's perceiving your relationship, it is simply perceiving not through the lens of ego. That's what enlightenment is. And it's useful to at least have some basis of understanding in this. Because an awakening, or in Zen what they call a satori experience, seeing beyond the veil, itself, seen without the veil of ego, may be the true perception, the natural perception, the undistorted perception. But what most people want to do is they think enlightenment is like an unending satori experience. Right? An unending enlightenment experience, an unending awakening experience, an unending experience. But it's not an unending experience at all. It has nothing to do with an unending experience. That misunderstanding will get you to do more tail chasing than you ever dreamed possible. In the end, enlightenment has very little to do with enlightenment experiences. It is simply not perceiving through the lens of ego. That's what it is. And there's no doubt, it's pretty good not perceiving through the lens of ego. It's happiness. It's peace. It's the end of your search. Not that you find anything except sanity. Not that you attain anything except seeing things as they actually are. And that's what nirvana is, seeing things as they actually are. So when you see things as they naturally are, you see everything is one. And the nature of anything and everything is not nearly as substantial as you thought. Its nature is emptiness. The nature of anything is nothingness. The nature of anything and everything is that it's all insubstantial. And so these aren't some altered states of consciousness, you see. From the enlightened perspective, everything else is an altered state of consciousness. Does that make sense? Ego is the if you want to have altered states of consciousness, most people are already in one of the more wild altered states of consciousness. It's called egoic state of consciousness. It's a wildly altered state of consciousness. It gets you to perceive things that aren't there. It gets you to see enemies where there aren't any. It gets you to see dualities where there aren't any. It gets you to have things like a self-image when there isn't a self there to begin with. It gets you to have certain thoughts about yourself when in actuality the only thing that could be called a self at all is simply the thoughts you have about it. So if you want an altered state of consciousness, I'd stick with ego. It's about as advanced as you're going to get. It is existence, doing its damnedest, its best job at altering consciousness. And yet in spirituality, somehow, spirituality got associated with altered states of consciousness. You can alter your state of consciousness. Lots of the types of spirituality that people practice, they'll alter your state of consciousness. You can chant God's name for 4 or 5 hours. You'll notice your consciousness starts to alter, change. You'll feel different. Things will look different. All sorts of things you can do to alter your state of consciousness. But the funny thing is, enlightenment has nothing to do with any of that. Enlightenment is the unaltered state of consciousness. Consciousness needs no alteration to see that everything is one. Since everything is one, you don't need an altered state of consciousness to perceive that everything is one. You need an altered state of consciousness to perceive that everything is actually more than one. Like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 or 1,000. So in these moments, in Zen they call them satori's, we often call them awakenings. In the awakening, the valuable thing about the awakening is how much of egoic consciousness falls away in the awakening. In the end, the next week or the next month, that's all that's going to matter. Because the experience, the sense of aha, which you get upon the awakening to your true nature, aha, I thought I was that, but that I thought I was just an imagination. What a relief. It's a great aha. But you're not going to have an aha forever, are you? A week later, your aha is going to be quite gone. Right? You ever notice that? You have the biggest revelation in the world. Oh my God! And then a week later, it's like, yeah, well, So it's not the quality of the aha sustaining, because it won't sustain itself. Which is great, because that means you can always have another one. The significant thing about those moments, though, those satori's or awakening to your true nature, is how much of the egoic consciousness falls away. That's because that's what you're going to live with, right? That's what's going to be with you the next week, the next month, the next year, maybe the next lifetime. And as the point of orientation, or the what to focus on, since egoic state of consciousness, duality, seeing things as duality, through the lens of duality, it's actually something that must be constantly maintained. The egoic state of consciousness actually takes a great amount of energy and a great amount of effort. Since it's not true, it has to keep building this falseness constantly, otherwise it will end. Right? Because what is not true ends as soon as it's not being fueled. And so illusion, or the egoic state of consciousness, must constantly be fueled like a fire, right? Or like a coal stove, which you must keep shoveling fuel into it. So the useful spiritual disciplines are simply ways of not putting more energy into egoic consciousness. That's basically what they're doing. Stop fueling it. Stop fueling it, and it can't sustain itself.